I'm 15 and I was playing some video games before passing out. It was about, say, 11 p.m. when I hear the doorbell ring. Out of instinct, I began walking downstairs, but about halfway there, rationality came to mind. Who rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? I silently strode back upstairs and stood in the hall, kind of expecting something bad to happen. An exact minute later, it rings twice. My parents begin to leave their room and give me a quizzical look, and all I had to respond was a shrug. Then he starts banging on the door. My mother jumps at the first bang, and my father's eyes widen, but more in confusion than fear. He decided to go downstairs and peep through the view hole. It was our neighbor. My dad hesitantly opened the door, and I could hear my father's voice trembling. Hey, what do you need? Next thing I hear is a full-blown screaming argument from our neighbor, claiming that this household was his and we stole it from him. My father's uneasiness was quickly replaced with annoyance, and he simply shut the door without giving our neighbor the time of day. My dad stepped on the first step going up the stairwell when our neighbor first hit the door. I'm not talking about banging with a fist. This man was full body slamming it. My father was stunned for a second, and my neighbor charged the door again. This time, we began to hear the splintering of wood. Everyone reacted at once. My father went to brace the door with his body, my mother went to go get the other two kids, and I went for 911. The body slamming ensued for another 5 minutes, and while I was on the phone with 911, it stopped. I thought it was over, and I was relieved, but I still stuck on the phone. I go peek out the front window of my house, and boy, was it only getting started. Our neighbor took his Jeep Wrangler and simply directed it straight at our house. We had zero clue what he was doing until we hit the gas and we heard the squealing of tires. Then he immediately hit the brakes. He was trying to scare us out of the house. I was still on the phone with 911, and I stepped away from the window to comfort my siblings, crack jokes and such. Eventually, police arrived and arrested him. The next morning I left for school, still shaken from the night before. I stepped on our front steps and saw tire marks leading up to our front door. The lunatic actually nearly rammed our door down with his car. I never found out if he was mentally ill or on something, though it really seemed like it, and I never want to see this guy again. But the unfortunate part is that he lives directly to my right. This is about 5 years ago now, about halfway into my uni course. I was living in a shared house with this harmlessly useless stoner, and nothing short of a bomb would disturb him up at night. The house was on a fairly well-trafficked road, on a route between several local pubs. I had essentially the entire lower floor of a 3-tier house. Basically, it was a luxury basement, with ground-level windows looking up onto the front door. Like any good student, I stayed up late frequently, chatting and playing games with friends online. It was about 3 in the morning when I went to bed, but about half an hour later I heard frantic slamming on the front door. My first thought was that my housemate maybe had been out. Hadn't seen him that day. He had some pretty sketchy friends that I tried to avoid and had forgotten his key. This is a pretty common occurrence, and I'd frequently come home to him sat outside waiting for me to let him in. I took a quick look up at the window but couldn't see anything in the dark. All the while the hammering continued. I went up and opened the door, dazed, confused, and pretty cross, only to find this very drunk, middle-aged woman. She was barely able to stand or make a sentence, and in hysterics. Genuinely concerned, I make the mistake of asking what's wrong, and she proceeds to ramble on about having lost her belongings following some sort of argument. She says she can't get home, so she'd been knocking on all the houses along the street, but no one would let her in. She starts pleading with me to let her sleep in my house for the night, and although she's clearly vulnerable, that's not happening. By this point, though, I'm pretty scared she'll crack a window, though, or something if I just shut the door on her. She seemed pretty volatile, and my bedroom windows were cracked. Single glazed panes. Gotta love student housing at kicking height. Somehow I convince her to let me pay for a taxi instead. However, given the condition she's in, I feel it's safer for both me and her if I call the police. I ask her to wait on the step while I go get my phone and then quietly call the police. I explain the situation and they say they'll send someone ASAP. I return to the lady and as cheerfully as I could say the taxi's on its way, then spend the next excruciating half hour trying to keep her calm by sympathetically listening to her switch between talking about whatever argument she had and her ranting on about how people were terrible and that no one in the world cared anymore. Eventually, the police car pulls up, at which she turns around furiously, accusing me of lying, I did, and calling the police, like any sane human. For a moment, I'm terrified that she's going to go for me, and really wished as a small girl, barefoot in a fuzzy red dressing gown, that my 6-foot dodgy housemate had been there to back me up. Thankfully, 2 very large and very kind policemen get out at that point and gently convince her that they were driving that way anyway, saw the commotion, and that they would give her a free ride home instead of getting charged a bomb by the taxi. As they walked away, one of the guys explained that she was well known to them and that they would make sure she was safe that night. Thankfully, I never had another incident involving her, despite it being a fairly small town, and nothing worse happened than me being a little shaken up for the rest of the night. I have, however, moved back here to live with my now boyfriend, not the stoner, a sweetheart who prefers his herbal mixes and tea bags instead, and a crush I had on my course, so it's entirely possible we could meet again. Hopefully by now, though, she's getting a bit better in life. We all have our rough times, and I hope she's okay. The kicker is, my housemate was in, and he slept through the entire thing. He was generally bemused when I told him and said he hadn't heard a word. To start off, I'll just give a bit of background. Every Friday, me and a group of friends would meet up at a friend's house basement to watch movies and just hang out. My house was a couple houses down in a street that curved slightly, so from my friend's house you couldn't see my house, but it was within the same block. I was 16 at the time, and normally another friend who was making his way home would walk me back, but he didn't go this particular Friday. It was sometime around 9, and I decided to walk back home, gave my mom a quick call before I left, and mentioned I would be heading home soon. When I left my friend's house, there was a group of guys hanging out outside. I didn't think much of it, since it was normal for people to be hanging out around this time in the area. As I make my way down a couple of houses, I feel like I'm being watched, but don't think much of it until I am being surrounded by a bunch of guys who look to be about 18 to 21. Truthfully, I didn't know what to do, so I just kept walking and trying to get home as they said things to me and started getting closer. At some point I stopped, scared as they closed in on me within sight of my house. I couldn't even scream of how terrified I felt when I heard a scream yelling for them to get away. Apparently my mom got a feeling to look out the window, and I'm so glad she did. She screamed for my dad to go out, and he did, getting between me and them. He just told me to run inside the house. The creeps ran away while grabbing a metal garbage can top and throwing it at us, landing on top of our car in the driveway. That dent always reminded me of how lucky I was. So a few weeks ago, I was up late and wide awake and realized I hadn't eaten dinner. It was around midnight and I wasn't in the mood for drive-thru and hadn't done grocery shopping, so I decided to go to my local 24-hour Walmart for a frozen pizza and some ice cream. I'm clearly single. My city is very middle class, very quiet, very suburbia, so I was really not feeling at all concerned about going. I got to the store and then sat in my car for a minute, checking a text I'd received while driving. I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but initially ignored it. I'm in a parking lot. Of course there will be movement. However, some gut feeling made me look over, and I noticed someone was, straining to catch a glimpse of me. Now, this isn't abnormal because I actually have a shaved head and am a woman, and I get a lot of looks for it on a regular day, especially living in suburbia. People are always drawn to take an extra glance at the unusual, and I see people all the time doing the scan because they want to figure out if I'm a guy or a girl, if I'm sick, why I have a shaved head. I'm not punk or alternative, and I definitely appear healthy, so I understand to a point the confusion or stares. I don't get that weirdness in the city, but that's besides the point, I guess. So as I glance at him quickly, I give the old half-smile. We both are acknowledging each other, so you can stop now, non-verbal thing. My state is pretty passive-aggressive, so that's a thing here. He quickly looks away. I go back to my text. A tingling feeling on the back of my neck makes me look over, and now I'm really creeped out. He's really staring at me now, and now that I'm looking closer, I see the way he's staring is not at all out of curiosity. I look at his eyes, and they're dead and blank and menacing all at the same time, if that makes sense. Something about his eyes sent ice through my gut. I can see he's in a rusty truck full of weird stuff in dirty plastic bags and has a giant smear of what looks like blood all over the passenger door, like old dried blood. I grew up in a family of hunters. I know the sight of blood when I see it, and there was a lot of it. I just had all my instincts screaming that something was terribly, terribly wrong. This all takes about 30 seconds, I'm guessing. To describe his looks, his face is kind of similar to Warren Jeff's. Not that that matters, just painting the picture. I should mention he wasn't blinking. He was really straining to see me. He held up his phone without looking at his phone and still not blinking, and flash, he's just taking a picture of me. I'm scared at this point. My fingers and knees are trembling, and I push down on the brake, and it takes me a few tries to push the button to start the car. He takes another picture. He starts his truck. I drove right out of the parking lot and onto the main road. He's following me, and I debate calling the police. I'm about to call when I realize he's not behind me anymore. Okay, I'm fine. Everything is good. It's fine. I took the long way back to the store. Yes, back to the store. Apparently I'm incredibly stupid, I don't know. I get to the store a little jumpy, but he's not around. I'm inside with my basket, I have my pizza, and I'm now browsing for the pint of ice cream I'd like. I see another flash. I turn. It's him. At the end of the aisle. He's still holding his phone up weirdly without looking at it. His clothes are incredibly dirty. I'm angry and I now yell, "I'll screw this dude," because I get aggressive when I'm scared. I slammed the freezer door shut and began stomping toward him, even though I was terrified, to try to scare him off, and it worked a little bit. He ran off. The ice cream is near the registers, so I grab a random pint and very quickly hustled to the register. He wasn't behind me. I start ringing up and look behind me, and he's in the women's clothes, which is right behind the register. He has his hand on a pile of shirts, and he's kind of fingering and rubbing the shirt on top and looking at me. I told the cashier as quickly and quietly as I could what was happening, and she called the MOD, who I guess called the police. She advised me to stay by her. He must have gathered what was happening and scampered off. By the time the police arrived, he was gone, and my shock had worn off, and I was visibly upset. The police not only walked me to my car, but followed me home, it's not far, to make sure I wasn't followed by the creep. I'll never go to that store again, and I've been getting so creeped out coming home at night. I live alone half the time, and my daughters live with me the other half of the time. I still don't feel safe. This happened a few weeks ago. I recently graduated from college with a degree in biology, but decided to take a minute for myself before applying to medical school. My school was in a dangerous area, and I still rent in the area because my roommate is a master's student at the same university. We live about 5 blocks off of campus on a street where you wouldn't want to be caught alone at night. One day, I was by myself in our apartment jamming to some tunes, and I heard banging on the door. This was odd to me because my apartment is a row home style apartment with 2 other apartments below me and a front door, which I had most certainly locked behind me when I entered the building about 10 minutes prior. It was also concerning because I'm a 5-foot-tall woman and currently alone. Since we live on the top floor, nobody but my roommate and I are ever up on the 3rd floor, and I had not recently submitted a maintenance request. I turned the music off and sat still for a moment, waiting to see if anything happened again. The banging started once more. Now, I recognized that this was stupid, but I walked to the front door and opened it the tiniest crack to see a large, dirty, heavy-set man with a beard on the other side. I asked, "Can I help you?" And he looked me in the eye and said, "I'm here to fix the air conditioner leak. You need to let me inside the unit so I can make the repairs." My management company only has one regular maintenance worker who I was familiar with, and I had never seen the man standing at my door previously. He took a step forward while I quickly said, "Wrong place," and slammed and locked the door. Initially, I wasn't too concerned because maybe he's in the wrong place. I emailed my landlord to ask about maintenance reps in the areas, to which she replied, "The company has an HVAC technician out today, but none to your address. What did he look like?" After describing him as a large, heavier white man with a full beard, she responded, "That was not our HVAC rep. He is a small, thin man, and I'm not sure who was out there." And now I'm worried about my safety because clearly someone has keys to our building, and even my management company can't account for who he may have been. They will also not change the front door lock. So I'm kind of on my own with this one. "6 years ago, I had just graduated nursing school and had not gotten my certification yet, so while I studied and waited for my test date, I worked as a CNA. I was living with my fiancé, who is now my DH, but he had just graduated from school with his sports broadcasting degree and was working a paid internship, which paid like crap. So we were living in a one-bedroom apartment in a not-so-great neighborhood. The complex also was Section 8 housing, as well as housed offenders when they got out of local prison, something we did not learn until after we had already lived there for a few months. However, we befriended many of the residents. Our neighbors to the right, a young single mother on Section 8 with 2 kids who worked 2 jobs, became a very good friend. We still keep in contact with them to this day. Our neighbor to the left was an ex-con, a guy named Raymond that worked at a bakery. He often brought us bread and donuts that he had gotten from work. Then Jake moved in. He resided in the unit across from us. I was home the day he moved in. I was outside our apartment, sitting in a folding chair reading a magazine, enjoying the nice spring day. First thing I noticed was that he had an electric monitoring bracelet on. He also was a scary-looking guy. He was only 5'8", but had long, greasy blonde hair, a pockmarked face, and his facial tattoos put Post Malone to shame. He saw me sitting there as he moved things into his house, and he came over to where I was sitting. I grabbed my magazine to go into the house, and he started talking to me. Just polite things, and so I decided to be nice, even though my red flag meter was going off. He introduced himself as Jake, and I gave him my nickname. Not my actual name, but what others call me. He started asking me if I lived alone and other more personal things, so I gave a hasty answer of, "No, my fiancé lived here as well," then excused myself. I noticed he was still standing out there just staring at my door, so I quickly closed the shades and went to watch TV. Later on, when my fiancé was home, I told him about Jake and how he was staring. My fiancé told me just to be careful and that he would walk me in from work as we both left at the same time. For a while, things were good. I never saw Jake, and I think fiancé ran into him once. Then I ended up passing my nursing exam. I also got a better-paying job. Fiancé was hired by the network he was interning for. Things were looking up, and we found an apartment we could afford in a nicer part of town, with a doorman and everything. We bid adieu to the complex and the friends we had made there and moved into our new place. I thought my days of ever seeing Jake again was over. One day, while working my job in the busy ER, I saw a familiar face. It was Jake. He had taken an overdose of meds and was on a 24-hour observation. There was not a room available for him, so he was kept in the ER. I went in to take his vitals, and he recognized me. He then went off on me about how I had moved out without saying goodbye and how much he missed me. Just crazy things, being that we barely knew each other and had really only talked that one time. I explained myself to the charge nurse, and she got someone else to babysit him as I didn't feel comfortable. After my shift, I headed out to my car, and I was about to get in when I saw Jake walking briskly towards me. I got in my car, locked the car, and started it by the time he made his way over. He started hitting the car, banging my trunk and slapping the windows, shouting at me to open the door. I drove off, but not before he got one good kick to my bumper. I was terrified to go to work, and for a while, I insisted that security escort me to and from my car. 3 months had passed with no sign of Jake, I started realizing, and I started walking to and from my car by myself. One day, I'm heading to my car when someone bumps into me, like they were trying to bump my hip, but I am tiny, only 5'2" and was 110 pounds at the time, so I lost my balance and went flying. I twisted my ankle and I'm grabbing it when I look up, ready to tell whoever did it off, when I see it's Jake. His hair had been cut, but he looked manic, and he was staring weirdly at me. I hit the panic button on my car and he took off running. After that, I went to the police. I got a restraining order against him. He ended up breaking the restraining order by approaching me again at work, and this time thankfully when I was around several other coworkers. He ended up going to jail for breaking the restraining order and breaking parole. He was released last year according to his parole officer who contacted me. Thankfully, we live a state away from there now, and he never knew my full name. I had a stalker growing up. She lived in my neighborhood with her parents. Note, she's an adult living with her parents, not a child. I used to ride my bike around the neighborhood and would always pass her house. Every time I passed her house, I would notice that she would come outside and watch me, if she wasn't already there, that is. I never thought anything of it because I was young. Her watching me turned into her trying to talk to me, but of course I would ignore her because I didn't know her. Then she would follow me wherever I rode my bike. Now I was getting freaked out. Why was this woman, who I didn't know, following me? That turned into her following me to my house, asking if she could come in. I eventually stopped riding my bike altogether, so this lady stopped doing what she was doing. I'm 14 now, and still living in the same neighborhood. She's back. It all started with her coming to our door and knocking on it. I remember her and immediately freaked out. Her knocking turned into her banging and violently shaking at the doorknob whilst yelling. She knew our names. She yells, "Hi" to me and my mom's name. I have no clue how she knows our name. Neither me or my mom have ever spoken to her in our lives. The only way she would know our names is if she asked the neighbors that knows us or the landlord, which is really creepy. Why couldn't she have just asked us ourselves for our names? One night, my mom is getting ready to head out to do the laundry at the laundromat near our house. My mom unlocks the door and then goes into the living room where I am. The lady had pushed the door open, came into our house, and started to walk into the living room. My mom yelled at her and pushed her out, slamming and locking the door. This must have meant that she was waiting for the door to be unlocked or waiting for one of us to come outside, or it could have been a coincidence, but I don't know. My mom left eventually, and as she was walking into the laundromat, the lady was walking behind her, but my mom noticed and slammed the door so she couldn't get in. It was 12 a.m. at this point. I was folding the clothes and I hear banging on the door, and what do you know? Of course, it's her again. I check the peephole and I can see her running away, as if she knew I was there. Now, it was maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I was in the living room again. I hear something moving in the grass behind the house. I check to see what it is, and it was the lady. She ran away as she saw me look at her. This has been happening every night since then. I've also been hearing a few people stand in front of our yard, talking to each other quite often late at night, but I'm not sure if this has anything to do with this woman or not. I think this might be happening to our neighbors as well, because I heard them talking about a stalker a couple of times. I remember them saying something along the lines of, "Go away, you neighborhood stalker." I have no idea why this started up again, but I wish it hadn't. Currently, I attend a university in a small town here where there's many college students, but it's hard to really build a connection. So my friends and I decided to try Tinder for a few weeks because we wanted to meet guys. After talking to some guys, I found a guy named Josh who had just graduated with a degree in computer engineering and was really funny. I knew deep down inside I wouldn't have any romantic relations with him, so I kept it casual. At some point, I told him I was deleting Tinder, so we exchanged numbers and continued texting for a few days. Slowly, I started losing interest in him and stopped replying to his messages. Occasionally after that, he would text me, but I wouldn't reply. Yeah, I know, not so nice. Eventually, I moved on from him and planned to go to another guy's house one night. My friend wanted to meet up earlier that night, so I stopped at the gas station to buy us some snacks. While there, I got a text from Josh asking me why I was at a certain gas station with a boy. I was super confused because I was alone, so I asked if he was there too. He didn't reply, so I brushed off his comments and went about my night. Fast forward a few days later, I became curious about his comment and texted him back about it. He disregarded my question and continued the conversation as normal. We continued texting and agreed to meet up at his place to hang out. Before class one day, I decided to go over to his house and hang out. I met him, and he looked entirely different from his pictures. It was like he was a catfish. I was definitely confused, but decided to still give him a chance. He later admitted that the picture was 2 years old. After talking for a little bit, things got heated and we started undressing. Then, things happened. After we were done and just laying in bed, he started telling me about his cool inventions and how he is able to program the lights in his room to his phone. Then I asked him what else he is able to do using his softwares, and he mentioned how he was able to access my phone and view me through my phone a few weeks back. I wanted to make sure that you weren't a catfish, so I looked through your camera on your phone to see you, Josh said. I was so mortified, but I had to act natural so I can find out what other things he was capable of doing. So when I was at that gas station that night, were you able to track me? I asked him. He then proceeded to admit to me that he's been able to access my messages, and that's how he knew I was meeting a guy that night. Mind you, I'm naked in this bed with this guy while he's telling me this. I then proceeded to tell him that I had to go to class and attempted to put my clothes on. He then persuaded me to continue whatever we had going on, but the look on my face clearly stated I was ready to go. He continued to insist, but I said, I think we're done here, and got up to finish putting my clothes on. Josh then asked if I wanted to meet at my house on 24th Street next time. Baffled by his statement, I told him that I don't live there anymore. Josh then called me a liar and said, Don't lie to me. I know you live on 24th. I then persisted that I moved and I hadn't been at that address for a few months now. Creeped out by his comments, I started putting my clothes back on while he told me that it's easy for anyone to access my IP address, so it wasn't anything serious. I couldn't believe he was trying to convince me that his actions weren't severe after he just admitted to invading my privacy. After convincing him that I was late for class, I quickly left his place without raising suspicions that I was creeped out. Later that week, he texted me that he fell for my personality and wanted to meet again. As soon as I received that message, I told him I didn't want to see him anymore, and then blocked his number in hopes of forgetting him forever. It's been a few months since that incident, and he hasn't tried to contact me, which I hope is a good thing. This story happened many years ago. I was 19 years old and lived with my parents at home in a fairly bad neighborhood. At the time, I had a very large, loving dog that was half Great Dane and half English Mastiff, who was the sweetest little angel you could have ever met, but huge. We were talking over 5 feet on her hind legs and well over 100 pounds. It was late one night, and I decided that the middle of the night was when I wanted to go to a local 24-hour grocery store to get a few snacks. At the time, I didn't own a car, but I did have a license, and my father had a car. Since I was young, I figured I could take the car, drive the few miles to the store, pick up my snacks, and be back having the car in the driveway before anyone knows I'm gone. The only issue was I knew my dog would start barking and crying if I left her alone while I went to the store. So I decided that I would take her with me and leave her in the car, since it's the middle of the night, so it's not going to be hot and all will be well. I get to the store, get out, and pick up a few snacks, pay the total, and head back to the car. It's the early 2000s, and my keys are on a lanyard around my neck. As I am walking quickly towards my father's car, I notice in my peripheral vision there's a man who had gotten up from a bench on the side of the building. I heard him say something, but I don't turn around and have no clue what it is. I start to quicken my pace and wonder if I'm being paranoid. By the time I open my car door, this man was in a full sprint towards me. No keyless entry system or alarm. I slam the car door shut, and before I can even lock the door, I see a hand slam on my window, full palm. In the next split second, my beautiful, amazing, huge dog lunges from the passenger seat across my driver's seat towards the window. With teeth and barking, I had never seen her act like that. Then I hear some obscenities from the man before he disappeared off into the darkness. I got home safe that night and nothing came of it. The neighborhood the stores are located in are notorious for panhandlers and theft and robberies, so I can't tell for sure what that person wanted from me. If they would have hurt me or if I was just overreacting. What I can tell you is that I'm very glad that I had my guardian angel with me that night. This happened about 4 or 5 years ago when I was a cashier at a pharmacy chain. This pharmacy is not in the greatest part of my small Midwestern town. It's at the worst part of a deserted shopping plaza just in front of a trailer park that has all kinds of issues. It wasn't a bad job, paid the bills and whatnot. I even was on a first-name basis with a good chunk of our customers due to it being the only pharmacy in the area and the next one a good 20-minute drive north. We had a lot of regulars. Being unmarried and childless, I was put on a lot of closing shifts. There were always at least 2 of us in the store at a time, so if I couldn't handle the drunks and the meth heads, I could always call in the closing manager for backup, or so I thought. A group of guys from the trailer park were in buying several cans of cheap tall boys to take back to the park. I knew them, but not well. One of them, despite being married, was always really flirty with any of the poor women working the register. That night, he cranked it up to 11 and kept telling me that I was going to go out with him. I kept turning him down, but he kept insisting. I ran to the phone to page my closing manager, telling them that since there were 4 of them, I needed to call for register backup. I didn't realize that she had gone to the walk-in cooler and couldn't hear anything. I felt trapped with this guy and his buddies, who were egging him on. I was so close to tears and kept insisting that no, I wasn't going to go out with him and that I was engaged. He offered to wait until the end of my shift to show me a good time. Thankfully, someone else came up to the line, and it was the man who ran security for all the events at my old high school. He chased them off and stayed with me until my manager came out of the walk-in. When we locked up for the night, I made a beeline for my car and raced home. To this day, I never let my guard drop when I walk alone to my car. So this is an ongoing situation, but it just went from annoying to seriously creepy. There's a maintenance guy at the office building I work at. He is hired through the landlord of the building, not our company. We call him Bob. Bob is an older guy, maybe late 50s, and a former heroin addict. I use quotes because we're all pretty sure Bob still occasionally indulges in the habit. He is very socially awkward, and his mannerisms and way of speaking are strange. He talks really slow and pauses in places where pauses don't make sense, or trails off mid-sentence. He also gets super close when he talks to you and makes intense eye contact or stares at me through our huge front window that happens to be in front of my desk. So, overall, mildly creepy guy. He has done some weird things in the past, like gave me his personal number, bought a coworker a $200 wedding gift, and had it delivered to her. I work with all women. The staring at people through the window, and he gave me a toy riding horse thing for my son, the kind that's on springs that rocks back and forth, and asked me personal questions about my marriage and tried to ask me to go on a date with him. I also found my car door open and a bunch of my stuff, like paperwork and some perfume and makeup I keep in my center console, moved around once when he was here. Today, he comes in the front office and just kind of stands there after saying hi. I ask my coworker if I can go out and have a smoke, and she says yes. I go get in my car and kept the door cracked so I could smoke. I was parked under a covered carport thing outside the back door across from the utility supply room. All of a sudden, Bob is standing there and kind of grabs the door and opens it a bit. I don't know where he came from, but I was listening to music, so I wasn't really paying attention. I took my headphones out and looked at him like, what? He doesn't answer right away, then asks me if I can take him to the store. A, he has a big white truck that he knows I know he has, and B, he knows well that I can't just up and leave while I'm working. I tell him that, and he goes, "Oh no, it's okay. I already asked, Ellen, and she said it's okay." I asked him why he can't just drive himself, and he sits there for a second, looking at me, and then asks me to come help him with something in the utility room. I say no, and I need to get back in before I get yelled at. He stared for a minute and then smiles the creepiest smile and says, "No, you won't. They think you took me to the store. We have plenty of time." I don't know if I'm accurately conveying the creepy, scary vibe he was putting off, but I was scared at this point. I didn't know what he wanted or what he was trying to accomplish, but it wasn't anything good. And on top of that, he wasn't moving out of my way and was like 6 inches away from me. I tell him to move, and he stands there for a few seconds and finally moves. I dialed 911 on my cell and jumped out of the car and ran inside. I seriously thought he was going to grab me and push me into the utility room or something. I'm still shook about it. Oh, and he didn't ask my manager Ellen anything about the store. He just made that up. Creepy. He left after that, and I really don't know what to do about the whole thing. This happened many years ago when I was 12 or 13. I was walking from my apartment to the grocery store to buy some things. It takes about 10 minutes to walk each way. As I was walking home from the grocery, a car with 4 big Nigerian men slowed down with their windows down trying to talk to me. "Hey there, little girl. What are you doing? You want to come to a party? We have drinks." Now, I'm a small 5'2" girl, so I was terrified. I ignored them and walked faster, hoping they'd go away. "You want to jump in bed? Why are you ignoring me?" I quickly managed to get past my guard's house and basically ran back to my apartment block. I was praying they wouldn't get out of the car and pull me in. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, our Let's Read official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And join my Discord to interact with me directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.